Hey readers! So yesterday we read Chapter 1 of Frog and Toad Are Friends by Arnold Lobel. Today we're going to read Chapter 2, The Story. Starts on page 16. And when we read, I want us to think about the main characters, actions, and feelings. And we're going to compare and contrast the main characters, actions, and feelings, showing how they're the same or how they're different. Chapter 2, The Story. One day in summer, Frog was not feeling well. Toad said, "Frog, you are looking quite green." "But I always look green," said Frog. "I am a frog." "Today you look very green, even for a frog," said Toad. "Get into my bed and rest." Toad made Frog a cup of tea. Frog drank the tea, and then he said, "Tell me a story while I am resting." So I'm noticing the main character's actions so far. Frog is not feeling well, and Toad is trying to help his friend by letting him rest and making him hot tea. And now Frog asks Toad to tell him a story. "All right," said Toad. "Let me think of a story to tell you." Toad thought and thought, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. "I will go out on the front porch and walk up and down," said Toad. "Perhaps that will help me to think of a story." Toad walked up and down on the porch for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad went into the house and stood on his head. "Why are you standing on your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I stand on my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Toad stood on his head for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad poured a glass of water over his head. "Why are you pouring water over your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I pour water over my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Toad poured many glasses of water over his head, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Oh my goodness. So turn and tell your buddy some actions of Toad so far. Good job, readers. Did you say he walked on the porch, he stood on his head, he poured water over his head? He did all this because he's trying to think of a story to tell Frog, but it is not working. Then Toad began to bang his head against the wall. "Why are you banging your head against the wall?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I bang my head against the wall hard enough, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Readers, do you think banging his head against the wall is going to help him think of a story? No, I don't either. "I am feeling much better now, Toad," said Frog. "I do not think I need a story anymore." "Then you get out of bed and let me get into it," said Toad, "because now I feel terrible." Frog said, "Would you like me to tell you a story, Toad?" "Yes," said Toad, "if you know one." "Once upon a time," said Frog, "there were two good friends, a frog and a toad. The frog was not feeling well. He asked his friend the toad to tell him a story. The toad could not think of a story. He walked up and down on the porch, but he could not think of a story. He stood on his head, but he could not think of a story. He poured water over his head, but he could not think of a story. He banged his head against the wall, but he still could not think of a story. Then the toad did not feel so well, and the frog was feeling better. So the toad went to bed, and the frog got up and told him a story." The end. "How was that, Toad?" said Frog. But Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep. Okay, readers, let's talk about the main characters' actions and feelings in Chapter 2. So turn and tell your buddy some of Frog's actions in Chapter 2. Good job, readers. Did you say he wasn't feeling well, he got into bed, and he started feeling better, and then he got up out of bed and he told Toad a story, a really funny story because it had just happened. Turn and tell your buddy some of Toad's actions in Chapter 2. Good job, readers. Did you say he helped Frog? He wanted to help his friend. He let him rest. He made him some tea. Then he tried to think of a story to tell him. And he walked on the front porch. He stood on his head. He poured water over his head. He banged his head on the wall. But he could not think of a story. Then he didn't feel good at all, and he got in bed to rest. Turn and tell your buddy something that was the same about the characters' experiences or actions from Chapter 2. Good job, readers. Did you say they both didn't feel well, so they both had to rest? Turn and tell your buddy something that was different about the characters' actions and experiences from Chapter 2. Good job, readers. Did you say Toad could not think of a story, but Frog did think of a story? Frog did not hurt himself trying to think of a story, but Toad did. Good job, readers. So remember, today and every day as you're reading, and especially chapter books, you can compare and contrast the main characters' actions and experiences.